My father looked at my Navy dress uniform and laughed. Playing dress-up again? You were never cut out for real military service. It wasn't joking. It was cruel mockery from a retired Marine colonel who believed I had embarrassed our family's legacy by washing out of basic training. I stood at my brother Jake's commissioning ceremony, surrounded by Navy officers who wore their ranks with earned pride, while Dad treated my uniform like a costume. Until Jake's captain walked over, stopped in front of me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. Welcome back, Navy Admiral. My name is Commander Sarah Mitchell, and for 15 years, I let my family believe I was a failed recruit instead of the most decorated female naval officer in American history. The Mitchell family military tradition runs deeper than ocean currents. 6 generations of warriors, each branch of service represented with distinction. My great-great-grandfather served aboard destroyers in World War I. My great-grandfather commanded a submarine during World War II. My grandfather was a Marine Corps legend who earned 3 Purple Hearts in Korea. My father, Colonel James Mitchell, became a decorated Marine officer who served multiple tours in Vietnam before transitioning to military intelligence. My younger brother Jake represents the family's current golden child. At 28, he's a newly commissioned Navy lieutenant stationed at Naval Station Norfolk, following an accelerated path through officer candidate school that has his instructors discussing fast-track promotions. His natural leadership abilities and tactical brilliance have Pentagon officials whispering about his potential as future naval command material. My older sister Maria retired as an Air Force major after distinguished service in Iraq and Afghanistan, now working as a defense contractor specializing in aerospace systems. Even my mother, though never enlisted, dedicated her life to supporting military families through base volunteer programs and spouse organizations. Then there's me, the family's greatest shame, the cautionary tale whispered about during military gatherings. The official story is devastating in its simplicity. Sarah Mitchell, the daughter who couldn't hack it. According to family lore, I enlisted in the Navy straight out of high school with grand ambitions, only to suffer a complete breakdown during basic training at Great Lakes. Unable to handle the physical demands and mental pressure, I was quietly discharged after 8 weeks and sent home in disgrace. The narrative continues. While my siblings built distinguished military careers, I spent my 20s drifting through civilian jobs, never finding direction, never living up to the Mitchell name. At family gatherings, I'm introduced with barely concealed embarrassment. This is Sarah, our middle child. She tried the Navy but, well, it didn't work out. She works in government administration now. The pause before administration always hangs heavy with disappointment. Military friends nod politely, then quickly redirect conversation to Jake's latest training achievement or Maria's consulting success. Our family home serves as a shrine to Mitchell military excellence. The walls display decades of achievement, framed certificates, commendation letters, unit citations, and photographs chronicling generations of service. My grandfather receiving his Purple Hearts, my father in Marine dress blues, Maria at her Air Force commissioning, Jake's recent OCS graduation. There's exactly one photo of me in uniform, my basic training portrait, tucked away in a corner like evidence of potential that was squandered before it could bloom. The family consensus is clear and painful. Sarah was the one who couldn't measure up, the weak link in an otherwise unbreakable chain of service. While her siblings excelled in military careers, she crumbled under the first test of military discipline and chose comfort over courage. My father's disappointment cuts deepest of all. A career Marine who earned his rank through blood and determination, he sees my supposed failure as a personal indictment of his leadership and values. He doesn't explicitly say I've dishonored the Mitchell legacy, but his eyes carry the weight of a man who believes one of his children chose to abandon everything he taught about duty, honor, and sacrifice. Jake maintains respectful distance, treating me with the careful kindness reserved for family members who've disappointed you but whom you're obligated to love. He includes me in celebrations but never asks my opinion on military matters. He's polite at holidays but talks around me when conversation turns to service and strategy. The truth is, I've spent 15 years allowing this fiction to persist because revealing my actual naval career would have compromised operations so classified that discussing them would constitute high treason. While my family saw failure, I was serving my country in ways they could never imagine. But today, at Jake's commissioning ceremony, that carefully maintained deception is about to be shattered forever. My older sister, Maria, retired as an Air Force major after distinguished service in Iraq and Afghanistan, now working as a defense contractor specializing in aerospace systems. Even my mother, though never enlisted, dedicated her life to supporting military families through base volunteer programs and spouse organizations. Then there's me, the family's greatest shame, the cautionary tale whispered about during military gatherings. The official story is devastating in its simplicity. Sarah Mitchell, the daughter who couldn't hack it. According to family lore, I enlisted in the Navy straight out of high school with grand ambitions, only to suffer a complete breakdown during basic training at Great Lakes. Unable to handle the physical demands and mental pressure, I was quietly discharged after 8 weeks and sent home in disgrace. The narrative continues. While my siblings built distinguished military careers, I spent my 20s drifting through civilian jobs, never finding direction, never living up to the Mitchell name. At family gatherings, I'm introduced with barely concealed embarrassment. This is Sarah, our middle child. She tried the Navy, but, well, it didn't work out. She works in government administration now. The pause before administration always hangs heavy with disappointment. Military friends nod politely, then quickly redirect conversation to Jake's latest training achievement or Maria's consulting success. Our family home serves as a shrine to Mitchell military excellence. The walls display decades of achievement, framed certificates, commendation letters, unit citations, and photographs chronicling generations of service. My grandfather receiving his Purple Hearts, my father in Marine dress blues, Maria at her Air Force commissioning, Jake's recent OCS graduation. There's exactly one photo of me in uniform, my basic training portrait, tucked away in a corner, like evidence of potential that was squandered before it could bloom. The family consensus is clear and painful. Sarah was the one who couldn't measure up, the weak link in an otherwise unbreakable chain of service. While her siblings excelled in military careers, she crumbled under the first test of military discipline and chose comfort over courage. My father's disappointment cuts deepest of all. A career Marine who earned his rank through blood and determination, he sees my supposed failure as a personal indictment of his leadership and values. He doesn't explicitly say I've dishonored the Mitchell legacy, but his eyes carry the weight of a man who believes one of his children chose to abandon everything he taught about duty, honor, and sacrifice. Jake maintains respectful distance, treating me with the careful kindness reserved for family members who've disappointed you but whom you're obligated to love. He includes me in celebrations but never asks my opinion on military matters. He's polite at holidays but talks around me when conversation turns to service and strategy. The truth is, I've spent 15 years allowing this fiction to persist because revealing my actual naval career would have compromised operations so classified that discussing them would constitute high treason. While my family saw failure, I was serving my country in ways they could never imagine. But today, at Jake's commissioning ceremony, that carefully maintained deception is about to be shattered forever. The encrypted satellite phone buzzed at 4:23 a.m., its distinctive tone cutting through my sleep like a submarine's emergency klaxon. Only 5 people in the world had access to this particular communication line, and none of them called unless American naval operations faced imminent threat. Admiral Mitchell, the voice belonged to Fleet Admiral Thompson, Chief of Naval Operations. We have a critical situation developing in the South China Sea. Multiple Chinese naval vessels have surrounded the USS Constellation, and they're demanding immediate surrender of classified materials. I was already moving toward my secure communication terminal, 15 years of crisis management experience, taking control as my mind processed tactical implications. My body responded with the muscle memory of someone who'd spent decades making split-second decisions that could prevent international warfare. "What's our immediate strategic position?" I asked, entering my authorization codes into the encrypted system. The Constellation is outnumbered 12 to 1, carrying experimental naval technology that cannot fall into Chinese hands under any circumstances. They're requesting immediate tactical consultation from someone with South Pacific operational authority. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My blood went cold as the implications hit me. The USS Constellation, Jake's ship. My baby brother, who thought I was a basic training failure, was currently surrounded by hostile naval forces, carrying technology so classified that its capture could shift global naval power. Casualties reported? None yet, but the Chinese are escalating pressure every hour. They know exactly what classified systems are aboard, which suggests either signals intelligence penetration or human assets providing operational details. I accessed real-time satellite feeds on my classified terminal, watching as Chinese destroyers maintained aggressive positioning around the American vessel. The tactical situation was sophisticated, too sophisticated for standard naval harassment. Admiral, I need complete intelligence files on all personnel with access to Constellation's experimental systems, cross-referenced with anyone who's had contact with foreign naval attachés in the past 12 months. Already initiating, ma'am. But there's an additional complication. His voice carried weight I'd rarely heard in 15 years of naval service. Lieutenant Jake Mitchell is serving aboard the Constellation as communications officer. He's requesting strategic guidance on classified response protocols. My brother, my little brother, who believed I couldn't handle basic training, was about to request tactical advice from a Navy admiral, without knowing he was asking his own sister for help that could save his life. Sir, I should recuse myself from operations involving... Negative, Admiral Mitchell. You developed the South Pacific strategic doctrine they'll need to execute. Your personal connection doesn't override the fact that you're the only officer with comprehensive knowledge of both the experimental technology and potential Chinese counter-strategies. I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen, seeing not the family failure Jake knew, but the woman who'd spent 15 years making decisions that protected American naval personnel from threats they'd never know existed. Understood, Fleet Admiral. I'll be at the Pentagon Naval Operations Center in 90 minutes. After ending the call, I stood in my Arlington apartment, surrounded by the carefully constructed fiction of my civilian life. Simple furniture, generic artwork, nothing suggesting the person living here held the highest operational authority in the United States Navy. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Sarah, can't say much, but we're in a tense situation overseas. Dad's been talking about how proud he'd be if you'd ever understood what real military service means. Wish you knew what it felt like to serve your country when it actually matters. I read that message 4 times, each reading cutting deeper than submarine pressure. My brother was currently surrounded by hostile naval forces using tactics I'd personally developed to counter. He'd be implementing emergency protocols I'd personally designed. His survival might depend on strategic decisions I'd personally authorized. And he had no idea that the sister he pitied for failing basic training was about to coordinate his rescue from the Pentagon's most classified naval command center. I grabbed my security clearance, the one reading Admiral Sarah Mitchell, Chief Naval Strategic Operations, Ultra Black Clearance, and headed into the Washington darkness. In 6 hours, Jake would receive tactical orders. In 12 hours, he'd be executing naval strategies I'd created. And somewhere between those moments, I'd have to decide whether protecting my cover was worth more than ensuring my brother survived his first real test of naval combat. The Pentagon Naval Operations Center at 5:30 a.m. operated like the nerve center of a global maritime empire. Unlike the tourist-accessible sections of the building, these depths housed the classified command structure that coordinated American naval power across 7 oceans. Security checkpoints that normally processed hundreds of daily personnel stood nearly empty, manned by guards whose expressions sharpened when they scanned my ultra-black clearance, the kind of access that granted entry to rooms most Pentagon staff didn't know existed. I passed through 11 increasingly secure checkpoints, each one granting access to deeper levels of naval command authority. My footsteps echoed through corridors lined with reinforced blast doors, each hiding command centers capable of coordinating fleet movements from the Arctic to the Antarctic simultaneously. The Strategic Naval Operations Center occupied an entire classified floor, its existence omitted from all public Pentagon documentation. Here, in spaces that appeared on no official building plans, America's highest naval commanders made decisions that could reshape global maritime balance within hours. When I entered the main command center, organized chaos greeted me like a familiar ocean current. Dozens of uniformed officers and classified contractors worked at terminals displaying real-time intelligence from every naval theater worldwide. Satellite feeds, sonar tracking, communications intercepts, weather patterns, and threat assessments flowed in constant streams that trained analysts converted into actionable naval strategy. 5 massive screens dominated the front wall, displaying detailed maps of the South China Sea with red markers indicating Chinese naval positions around the USS Constellation. Live satellite imagery showed the tactical situation in devastating clarity. One American destroyer surrounded by a coordinated Chinese fleet in international waters. Admiral Mitchell, Captain Rodriguez, my senior naval intelligence coordinator, approached with a tablet containing tactical assessments. We've confirmed the Chinese fleet is using aggressive positioning tactics designed to force either surrender or international incident. Their formation suggests months of planning and detailed intelligence about Constellation's mission profile. I studied the data, my mind automatically processing naval tactics and response scenarios. This wasn't standard territorial harassment. This was strategic intimidation designed to test American resolve while gathering intelligence on our most advanced naval technologies. Status of the experimental systems? Fully operational but vulnerable to capture if the vessel is boarded. Admiral, the technology aboard Constellation represents 15 years of naval research and development. If it falls into Chinese hands, it could shift Pacific naval superiority permanently. A chill ran through me as the implications crystallized. If Chinese naval intelligence successfully captured the experimental systems, Jake's mission failure could compromise American naval operations for decades. Fleet Admiral Thompson appeared beside me, his expression grim as storm clouds. The President is convening an emergency National Security Council meeting at 0900. He wants complete tactical options and risk assessments within 3 hours. I nodded, stepping into the role I'd inhabited for 15 years, while my family believed I worked some meaningless civilian job. I need comprehensive files on all Chinese naval commanders in the South China Sea, analysis of their positioning patterns, and intelligence assessments on their probable objectives. As my team dispersed to execute these orders, I moved to my private terminal and began accessing databases so classified that unauthorized viewing carried automatic life imprisonment. Patterns emerged quickly. Too quickly for standard naval confrontation. This level of coordination suggested state-sponsored intelligence operations with specific strategic objectives. Captain Rodriguez, I called out, cross-referenced these positioning patterns with Operation Pacific Shield protocols. His face went pale with recognition. Operation Pacific Shield was a naval strategy framework I developed 8 years ago, so classified that fewer than 20 officers knew it existed. If Chinese naval intelligence was countering our own classified strategies, we faced threats far beyond territorial disputes. My secure phone buzzed with another message from Jake. Sarah, this is more intense than anything they taught us at OCS. The Chinese know things they shouldn't know about our capabilities. Sometimes I wish you understood what it feels like when national security depends on decisions you make in real time. I stared at that message, surrounded by screens showing the naval confrontation. I'd spend the next 8 hours strategizing, developing responses that could prevent international warfare while protecting my brother's life. In this command center, I was Admiral Mitchell, architect of American naval strategy, guardian of maritime security. But to Jake, I remained just Sarah, the sister who'd failed basic training and never understood what real naval service meant. 5 hours into the crisis coordination, the secure elevator doors opened with their distinctive naval chime, and I heard a voice that made my heart skip several beats. I need immediate access to Admiral Mitchell. We have a communications officer aboard the USS Constellation requesting strategic consultation on classified response protocols. I turned from my tactical terminal to see a familiar figure in navy dress whites striding across the command center floor. Captain William Hayes, Jake's commanding officer from Naval Station Norfolk. Behind him, looking overwhelmed and completely out of place among the classified terminals and global naval intelligence feeds, walked my brother. Jake's eyes swept the Strategic Naval Operations Center with obvious amazement. Rows of ultra-black clearance workstations, wall-mounted screens displaying real-time intelligence from every American naval vessel worldwide, uniformed personnel moving with the urgent precision of people managing global maritime security. This was his first glimpse into the Pentagon's true naval nerve center, and I watched him struggle to comprehend the scope of operations he was witnessing. Admiral Mitchell is currently coordinating multi-theater naval response, Captain Rodriguez intercepted them professionally. I can arrange a strategic briefing with… Captain, with all due respect, Captain Hayes interrupted, Lieutenant Mitchell has uncovered intelligence suggesting Chinese naval forces have detailed knowledge of our experimental systems. I need tactical oversight from someone with Pacific Fleet authority, and I need it immediately. I stood slowly, knowing that the moment I turned around, 15 years of carefully maintained operational security would collapse completely. For a decade and a half, I'd managed to keep my two worlds separated through meticulous cover stories and family deception. Captain Hayes, I said, my voice carrying the authority that comes with making decisions affecting global naval operations. I understand Lieutenant Mitchell has discovered concerning intelligence regarding Chinese tactical capabilities. Both officers turned toward me, and I watched recognition hit Captain Hayes like a depth charge explosion. His professional naval bearing cracked as his expression shifted from urgent briefing mode to complete shock, then to something approaching reverence. "Sweet mother of pearl," he whispered, staring at me like I'd materialized from naval legend. "Sarah Mitchell, you're the Phantom Admiral." Jake's head snapped between us, confusion and growing alarm written across his face. "Phantom Admiral? Captain, how do you know my sister?" Captain Hayes continued staring, his voice barely controlled with respect. "Know her? Jake, your sister revolutionized American naval strategy after the Cold War. The Phantom Admiral, the invisible strategist who redesigned our entire approach to Pacific maritime operations." "That's impossible," Jake said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. "Sarah washed out of basic training. She couldn't even handle 8 weeks of Navy discipline. She works some boring government job now." I watched my brother's worldview begin to fracture as Captain Hayes shook his head slowly, respectfully. "Jake, your sister didn't wash out of anything. She was recruited directly from her supposed discharge into the most classified naval position in American military history. Every tactical doctrine you've studied, every maritime strategy you've trained on, she created them." The command center had gone noticeably quieter around us, dozens of personnel pretending they weren't witnessing a family revelation with serious national security implications. Jake stared at me with growing horror and comprehension. "The government job story." "Operational cover," I said simply. "I've been a Navy admiral for 12 years, Jake. Before that, I spent 8 years developing the naval strategies that keep American sailors like you safe in hostile waters." Captain Hayes stepped forward, his voice filled with the kind of respect I'd never heard directed toward me by anyone in my family. "Ma'am, I've implemented tactical procedures you designed. I've got sailors alive today because of maritime protocols you created. It's an honor to finally meet the Phantom Admiral face to face." Jake looked like someone had just explained that the ocean flowed uphill. But Dad said, "Everyone said you were a failure." "I let them believe that," I said quietly, "because the alternative was revealing naval secrets that could get American military personnel killed, including you." The alarm that pierced the Naval Operations Center wasn't the standard alert. It was the tone reserved for imminent threats to American naval personnel. Jake jumped at the sharp, urgent sound, but I was already moving toward the main tactical display before the intelligence officer could speak. "Admiral Mitchell, we've intercepted Chinese communications indicating they're preparing to board the USS Constellation within 2 hours," Captain Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with urgency. "They know exactly which experimental systems to target, suggesting either signals penetration or human intelligence assets providing operational details." Jake stared at the screens showing his own ship surrounded by hostile vessels, his face draining of color as reality hit him. How was that possible? The experimental systems were classified at the highest levels. Only the senior officers knew the complete specifications. I studied the intelligence feeds, my mind processing tactical data points that others would miss. 15 years of naval strategy development kicked in as I analyzed communication intercepts, vessel positioning patterns, and boarding preparation indicators. It's not just possible, Jake, I said grimly. It's inevitable when someone's been feeding Chinese naval intelligence detailed information about American experimental technology for months. I moved to my secure terminal and began accessing files that made Captain Hayes step back involuntarily. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up databases so classified that viewing them without proper authorization was an act of treason. "Captain Rodriguez, bring up Operation Deep Current on screen 7, I ordered. Cross-reference with all personnel who've had access to Constellation's experimental systems in the past 6 months. Ma'am, those files are above standard naval clearance. I wrote those protocols, Captain. Execute the order now. As classified data cascaded across multiple screens, patterns emerged that painted a terrifying picture. Someone with high-level naval access had been systematically compromising American experimental programs for over a year. There, I pointed to a series of connections others had overlooked. Communication patterns from 8 weeks ago, technical access logs from 6 weeks ago, and experimental system specifications from 4 weeks ago. Someone's been tracking Constellation's mission in real time, and they have access to intelligence that should only be available to 7 people in the entire United States Navy. Jake watched me work with growing amazement, seeing analytical capabilities he'd never imagined his failed sister possessed. But there wasn't time for family revelations. His ship was about to be boarded by hostile forces, seeking technology that could shift global naval power. "Captain Hayes," I said, my voice carrying absolute authority, "I need you to immediately delay any engagement while I redesign the entire tactical response to this situation." "Ma'am, with respect, Pacific Fleet Command has already approved our defensive positioning." "Pacific Fleet Command doesn't have access to the threat intelligence I'm analyzing right now," I cut him off. "Your crew is facing a coordinated intelligence operation that could result in the capture of experimental technology and American naval casualties, unless we completely restructure this response." I turned to the main tactical display, calling up South China Sea maps and vessel deployment scenarios. My hands moved with practiced precision, redesigning naval tactics, communication protocols, and evasion procedures in real time. New tactical parameters. Instead of defensive positioning, we implement an offensive counterintelligence operation. Constellation Team Alpha creates false experimental system readings using deception protocols I developed in 2018. Team Bravo provides electronic warfare support from these coordinates, using classified countermeasures that don't appear in any Chinese intelligence files. I continued for 45 minutes, completely restructuring a multinational naval operation while Jake watched in stunned silence. This wasn't theoretical knowledge. This was practical expertise born from 15 years of designing operations that protected American naval assets from hostile intelligence gathering. The Chinese expect standard American naval doctrine because they've been monitoring our predictable protocols, I explained, adjusting final tactical details. Instead, we use modified maritime strategies they've never encountered, turning their intelligence advantage into our operational superiority. When I finished, Captain Hayes stared at the revised operation plan with obvious respect. "Ma'am, this is brilliant. You've transformed their boarding attempt into our counterintelligence victory." Jake looked at me like he was seeing a complete stranger. "How do you just redesign an entire naval operation from memory?" I met his eyes directly. "Because I've been doing this every day for 15 years, Jake. While you thought I was a basic training failure, I was designing the strategies that kept American sailors like you alive in hostile waters." After Captain Hayes left to coordinate the revised naval operation, Jake and I found ourselves alone in my private briefing room adjacent to the Strategic Operations Center. He sat across from my desk, staring at classified documents bearing my signature, my tactical analyses, my handwritten notes on decisions that had shaped American naval strategy for over a decade. "I need to understand something," he said finally, his voice small and lost. "If you've been all these years, why did you let us believe you failed basic training?" Why did you let Dad think you dishonored everything our family stands for? I looked at my brother, really looked at him, for the first time in years, without the careful emotional distance I'd maintained to protect operational security. He was 28 now, a commissioned naval officer with 3 months of active duty under his belt. But sitting in my classified briefing room, he looked like the confused teenager who'd asked why I never attended his high school graduation, why I missed his Naval Academy acceptance celebration, why I always seemed absent during family milestones. Because the truth would have gotten people killed, I said quietly, including Maria. I pulled out a classified file from my secure drawer, one that even Captain Hayes lacked clearance to access. Inside were photographs, mission reports, and intelligence assessments from my early years in naval special operations. This is Operation Silent Depths, 2009. 3 years after I supposedly washed out of basic training, I slid a photograph across the desk. That's me, with a submarine reconnaissance team in the Persian Gulf, developing intelligence networks that would eventually prevent multiple terrorist attacks on American naval installations. Jake stared at the photo of a woman in full diving gear, face partially obscured by underwater breathing apparatus but unmistakably me. Younger, harder, carrying herself with the lethal confidence of someone making life-and-death decisions in hostile underwater territory. But Dad said, "Everyone said you couldn't handle military discipline." I had a breakdown, I admitted, pulling out another file, but not the kind they believed. I opened the folder to reveal a mission report dated April 18, 2011. Jake leaned forward, reading the classified details of a naval intelligence operation in the Mediterranean. I was commanding a deep-cover submarine operation tracking foreign naval vessels attempting to gather intelligence on American carrier group movements when I received actionable intelligence about a planned attack on an Air Force transport convoy, I said, my voice steady despite the memories cutting through me like submarine pressure. The convoy Maria's logistics unit was responsible for coordinating. Jake's eyes widened in horror. Our sister Maria, the Air Force major who'd served with such distinction in multiple combat zones. The intelligence was solid, but acting on it would have blown my cover and compromised 2 years of infiltration work that had identified 12 foreign agents embedded in NATO naval operations. I had to choose, save my sister's convoy or protect an operation that could prevent hundreds of future intelligence breaches. I pulled out the final document, an after-action report written in my own hand, every word burned into my memory like acid. I chose the mission. I let Maria's convoy get ambushed because protecting my cover was deemed more critical to national security. 7 airmen died in that attack. Maria survived, but she carries psychological scars from that day, and she never knew her sister could have prevented their deaths. Jake's face had gone completely white. You had to choose between saving Maria and maintaining your operation? The breakdown came 4 months later, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. When I realized that excelling at this job meant making decisions that would haunt me forever. When I understood that protecting my family meant letting them believe I was a failure, rather than explaining their sister was the kind of person who could let American military personnel die to protect classified naval operations. I closed the files and looked directly at my brother. Every family gathering where Dad talked about honor and service, I sat there knowing I'd sacrificed our sister's safety for the greater good. Every time he mocked my uniform, I accepted it, because the alternative was explaining that their daughter was responsible for decisions that let American service members get killed to protect national security. Jake stared at me with tears in his eyes. All these years, you've been carrying this alone. It's not guilt, Jake. It's the price of keeping America's naval operations secure. This is what real service looks like in the shadows. 4 days after Jake's successful mission, which, thanks to the revised strategy, resulted in 0 casualties and the recovery of critical Chinese intelligence assets, my brother returned to the Pentagon with questions that had consumed him during the entire South China Sea operation. "I need to see everything," he said, entering my office with the determined stride of a naval officer who'd made a decision. "Every file, every operation, every piece of evidence that proves what you've actually been doing for 15 years. I hesitated. "Jake, some of this information could compromise ongoing." Could compromise what? Me? Sarah, I just spent 4 days executing naval tactics you designed, watching strategies you developed, neutralized Chinese intelligence operations. I think I can handle learning the truth about my own sister. I opened my ultra-black database and began accessing files, 15 years of classified operations, strategic assessments, and naval intelligence reports that bore my digital signature. As the documents populated across multiple screens, Jake pulled his chair closer, studying each one with the analytical mind of a trained naval officer. "This maritime doctrine from 2010, he said, pointing at a classified manual. "This is what they taught us at Naval Academy. The Mitchell Protocol for Submarine Warfare Tactics. Named after the family that developed it," I said quietly. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "But in the training materials, it says developed by Colonel James Mitchell and Naval Strategic Assessment Division. It credits Dad with creating these protocols." I pulled up the original files, showing timestamps and digital signatures proving the protocols originated from my terminal, my analysis, my strategic framework. "Your father provided Marine Corps liaison feedback and joint operations input. But the core naval architecture came from me." Jake's face went pale as he scrolled through document after document showing the same systematic pattern. My innovations credited to our father. My strategic breakthroughs published under his name. My revolutionary approaches to naval warfare attributed to Naval Strategic Assessment Division rather than their actual architect. "This can't be right," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dad's the most honorable Marine I know. He wouldn't steal credit for your work." I opened another classified file, email correspondence between my father and Pentagon publishing officials from 2012. Jake read over my shoulder as the truth unfolded in cold, bureaucratic language. "Classification requirements necessitate attributing naval innovations to Colonel Mitchell rather than the actual author to maintain operational security," he read aloud. "Publication under real author's name would compromise active submarine operations." The emails continued, showing how my father had initially resisted taking credit for work that wasn't his, but eventually agreed when told it was essential for national security and my personal protection. "He was protecting you," Jake said, but his voice sounded hollow. "At first, yes," I replied, accessing more recent files. "But look at these." I showed him documents from 2020, long after the original security concerns had been resolved. My father was still accepting recognition for naval innovations I'd developed, still consulting on maritime strategy using my classified research, still building his post-military reputation on my invisible contributions. "The Mitchell Doctrine for Modern Naval Warfare," Jake read from a prestigious Naval Journal article, by Colonel James Mitchell, USMC Ret. "Jesus, Sarah, this entire article is just a summary of your classified naval strategies." I pulled up the original strategic assessments I'd written, showing how my father had essentially repackaged my work for public consumption while I remained buried under classification restrictions that prevented me from claiming authorship. "Here's what really concerns me," I said, opening a file that made Jake gasp. 2 weeks ago, he submitted a proposal to the Naval War College for a new maritime strategy seminar. Look familiar? The proposal was nearly word-for-word identical to a classified strategic framework I'd submitted 6 months earlier. My father was now actively competing with me for naval consulting contracts, using my own innovations against me without realizing it. "He doesn't even know you're an admiral," Jake said, the full scope of the deception hitting him. "He thinks he's outsmarting some anonymous Pentagon naval strategist." The man who mocks my uniform has built his entire post-military consulting career on naval work I did, while he believed I couldn't survive 8 weeks of basic training. Jake insisted on being present when I confronted our father. He'd spent 5 days analyzing the evidence, cross-referencing publications with my classified work, documenting 15 years of systematic intellectual theft. The naval officer in him demanded accountability and justice. "This goes beyond family dynamics," he'd said with grim determination. "This is about integrity. About stolen valor. About the truth that's been buried for too long." We arranged to meet Dad at his Quantico consulting office, the private military firm, where he advised defense contractors on naval strategy, using expertise that was fundamentally mine. Walking into that building felt like entering a museum of my stolen achievements. Every Marine Corps certificate on the walls, representing evidence of systematic deception. Dad looked genuinely surprised to see us together, probably the first time Jake and I had appeared anywhere as United Allies in over a decade. He stood behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by awards and recognition plaques, including several honoring him as the innovator of modern joint maritime ground operations. "This is quite a surprise," he said, gesturing toward the leather chairs facing his desk. His voice carried the confident tone of a man accustomed to respect. "What brings both my children to?" "We know what you've been doing," Jake cut him off, his voice carrying the flat authority of a naval officer presenting evidence during an investigation. He placed a thick, classified folder on the desk with deliberate precision. "We know about the systematic theft." Dad's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, to something approaching defensive panic. He opened the folder and began scanning the documents Jake had compiled. Publication records, email correspondence, strategic assessments, showing clear plagiarism spanning over a decade. "I'm not sure what you think this proves," he said, but his hands trembled slightly as he turned pages, and sweat began forming on his forehead. "It proves you've been stealing credit for Sarah's work for 15 years, Jake said bluntly, his training in evidence presentation evident in his methodical approach. "Every award on this wall, every article you've published, every consulting contract you've secured, every speaking engagement you've accepted, it's all based on naval strategy work done by the daughter you mock for failing basic training." Dad's face went ashen as he continued reading, seeing evidence of his systematic deception laid out in undeniable detail. His breathing became shallow as the scope of his exposure became clear. "This is classified material," he said weakly, grasping for any defense. How did I access classified naval assessments?" I spoke for the first time, my voice calm and cold as ocean depths. "Because I wrote them, Dad. Every single one. Every strategic framework. Every tactical innovation. Every operational protocol you've claimed as your own." I stood and walked to his achievement wall, studying a plaque that read, "Colonel James Mitchell, pioneer of modern naval ground integration doctrine." "This doctrine you're celebrated for creating? I designed it in 2013, while you thought I was filing paperwork in some forgotten government office. This recognition for innovative joint operations strategies? Based on naval intelligence networks I developed while you told people I couldn't handle the physical demands of military service." Dad collapsed into his chair, the weight of complete exposure crushing his carefully constructed post-military identity. His face had gone completely white, and his hands shook as he set down the evidence folder. "You don't understand the full context," he said desperately, his voice cracking with panic. "They told me it was absolutely necessary for operational security. They said publishing under your name would compromise active naval missions and potentially get people killed." "That was 12 years ago," Jake interjected harshly, his naval training evident in his prosecutorial precision. "What's your excuse for the last 5 years of stealing her innovations? What's your justification for continuing to build your reputation on her work long after those security concerns were resolved?" Dad looked between us, trapped and desperate, like a cornered animal. I thought I was preserving the Mitchell family legacy in military strategy. When they said Sarah's work had to remain classified indefinitely, I genuinely believed someone should get recognition for Mitchell family contributions to American naval security. "So you chose yourself," I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of 15 years of accumulated betrayal. "You chose to let your daughter believe she was a failure, while you built an entire consulting career on her invisible brilliance." "I didn't know you were," he stopped, the full implications hitting him like a depth charge explosion. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Dear God, Sarah, are you telling me you're a Navy admiral?" I finished, watching his world collapse in real time. "The naval strategist whose assessments you've been plagiarizing for publication. The architect of every maritime protocol you've claimed as your own innovation. The creator of joint operations doctrine that's taught at war colleges worldwide under your name." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on his bookshelf and Dad's labored breathing. He stared at me like I was a complete stranger, which, In fundamental ways, I had been for 15 years. All these years, he whispered, his voice broken, when I mocked your uniform, when I criticized your lack of military achievement, when I told people you couldn't handle real service. You were talking to one of the highest-ranking naval officers in the United States military, I said. The person responsible for keeping American sailors alive, including your son. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of 15 years of systematic deception finally brought into the light. The decision to reveal my identity publicly came after sleepless nights wrestling with 15 years of secrecy. Jake had been relentless. Your contributions to naval doctrine deserve recognition. You've let Dad steal valor while hiding in shadows. The venue was the Naval War College's annual symposium. 500 naval officers, contractors, and journalists. Dad was the keynote speaker, presenting on 15 years of naval innovation. I sat in the back row, wearing Navy dress whites for the first time in 15 years. Dad began confidently, displaying slides showing submarine protocols I'd developed in 2014. 25 minutes into his presentation, I stood. Captain Hayes noticed first. "Holy hell," he whispered. "That's Admiral Mitchell." The whisper spread. Dad paused, squinting against stage lights. "I apologize for the interruption," I said clearly, "but there's been a significant misattribution of authorship." Complete silence. Dad's face went white. Captain Hayes stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy." The auditorium erupted. I walked down the aisle as Dad stood frozen. "Colonel Mitchell," I said formally, "the naval innovations you're presenting were developed under my direct command. The original architect was not you. It was Admiral Sarah Mitchell. The woman this family believed failed basic training." Thunderous applause followed, as truth was finally revealed. The healing with Maria had been profound. When she learned I'd allowed her convoy to be ambushed to protect my cover, she'd been silent for hours. Finally, she'd said something that still moved me. "You made an impossible choice. 7 airmen died that day, but the intelligence networks you protected probably prevented thousands more casualties. That's what command really means." Dad appeared smaller on screen, humbled but determined. After the public revelation, he'd faced immediate professional consequences. Several consulting contracts were terminated when clients realized his expertise was borrowed. But rather than destroying him completely, Jake and I had worked to find a path that preserved dignity while acknowledging truth. "The new role is challenging," Dad reported quietly. "Instead of claiming credit for naval innovations, I'm focusing on joint Marine-Navy operations using my actual field experience. It's honest work that draws on what I genuinely know." More importantly, he'd begun acknowledging his actions. The hardest part, he'd admitted during one painful conversation, was realizing I'd mocked my daughter's uniform while building my career on her brilliance. Jake pulled out a leather portfolio. "I've been working with naval historians to document the real Mitchell family story. Not the fabricated version, but the truth about how naval strategy actually develops." The book's working title, Maria added with a grin, is The Phantom Admiral: How America's Most Classified Naval Officer Served in Shadow. I smiled. "How about something simpler? Maybe Service Beyond Recognition, a naval family's hidden story. Because that's what this has always been about, finding ways to serve something greater than personal glory." The briefing that followed was unlike any I'd conducted. Instead of working in isolation, making strategic decisions implemented by strangers, I collaborated with family members who understood both the human cost of naval operations and the necessity of difficult choices. As we analyzed complex scenarios involving maritime security, international waters disputes, and strategic partnerships, I realized the 15 years of separation hadn't been wasted. Jake brought operational experience I couldn't gain in Pentagon offices. Maria offered aerospace perspectives I'd never considered. Even Dad's consulting provided practical knowledge about translating naval strategy into joint operations. We were stronger together than any of us had been apart. When the briefing concluded, Jake and I walked through Pentagon corridors toward the exit. These halls no longer felt like places where I hid from family. They felt like spaces where I could finally serve alongside them. "You know," Jake said as we approached the parking area, I used to think the highest naval honor was dying gloriously in combat. Now I think it might be living quietly with decisions that save lives nobody will ever know about. I looked at my brother, Lieutenant Jake Mitchell, naval officer, strategic consultant, and finally, truly, family, and smiled. That's what real service looks like. My name is Admiral Sarah Mitchell, and I am no longer a failure. I am simply a woman who found her own way to serve with honor. 7 months after the Naval War College Symposium, I stood in the Pentagon's Naval Strategic Command briefing room preparing for what would become the Mitchell Family Integration Initiative, a classified program where Jake would officially join my strategic assessment team as a field operations consultant. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 15 years, I'd worked to keep my family separated from my professional world. Now, Jake's operational experience and tactical knowledge had proven invaluable in bridging theoretical naval strategy with real-world maritime challenges. "Admiral Mitchell," Captain Rodriguez announced, "Lieutenant Mitchell has arrived for the strategic briefing." Jake entered in dress whites, but his demeanor had transformed completely. Gone was the unconscious pity he'd once shown toward his supposedly failed sister. In its place stood the respectful professional relationship between two naval officers who'd earned mutual trust through shared sacrifice. "Ma'am," he said formally, then smiled, "ready to revolutionize American naval strategy?" We'd spent recent months collaborating on something unprecedented, a comprehensive overhaul of naval doctrine that incorporated lessons from 15 years of classified operations. Jake's field experience provided crucial insights into how theoretical frameworks actually performed under combat conditions. Before beginning our briefing, I activated the secure communication system. The screen revealed Maria calling from her aerospace consulting office and, surprisingly, Dad appearing from his restructured marine consulting firm. "Little sister," Maria said, grinning through the screen. "Or should I say Admiral?" I'm still adjusting to the fact that my sister has been running American naval operations while I thought she was processing insurance claims. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.